Welcome to PLASA, day 2. Thank you very much for coming along for this talk. My name's Dan Crompton. I'm the Audio-Visual Service Manager for Tate Galleries. And that means I look after all 4 galleries. St Ives and Liverpool are pretty autonomous, so they mostly look after themselves, and I have to act as a sort of consultancy to support them. But I run the teams at Tate Britain and Tate Modern here in London. And my talk is going to have a little look at some of the journey we've taken over the last 16 years, which is how long I've been at Tate, perhaps even a little bit longer going back in my career. Some of the evolution that we've seen in artists' work and the sort of work we do in an institution like Tate, and perhaps it will help us have a little bit of an idea of what might be in store in future. So, yes, I can. That's comforting, that monitor. So it's just a slideshow, just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of our projects over the last few years. But I'm not going to be talking to the slides as such. What I'm going to do is start a little bit by something sometimes people ask me, particularly when they're quite keen on getting into the arts. How did you get that job then? How did you get to be head of AV at Tate? So I have the great good fortune of being the son of an artist, and Dennis, my father, worked predominantly in audiovisual media. So he was building multi-slide projection artworks in galleries going right back to, well, when I was born, really, beginning of the 60s. My earliest memory of an art gallery is being about 8 years old, pulling cables through a false wall. And I'm pretty sure what happened then is what's happened for the 50 years since then continuously, which is him pulling the whole family together to hurriedly help put everything into the gallery and make it work in time for opening. That seems to have been the story of my life. And that he has a very long history and was a bit of a pioneer of that back in the 60s along with others. So I've been very fortunate to learn a lot from him, and through that to have travelled the world, and my CV's bolstered a little bit by having installed in lots of major galleries around the world. After school, though, it was time to get an actual job and move into the professional world. I became an AV technician in an art school. And have developed contacts and associations with artists as a result of that again have carried on for the last 12. That was 1981, so however many years it has been since then. In parallel, my own creativity is music. I'm an instrumentalist, a writer, producer, but I think what I'd say about that side of my career is that has helped inform my understanding of stage and staging. So I've got kind of both sides, the gallery side, the fixed install side, if you like, and the event side. Work freelance, corporate events and anything, whatever you say, you pay me for it, I'll do it. Along the way, lots of experience in many different kinds of venues and boardroom installs and all that sort of stuff. Moved into universities as an AV, by that time AV supervisor and AV manager, and then the job came up in 2007 at the Tate, and so some of that stuff must have looked reasonable on the CV, I guess. So in the absence of anyone better to do it, I said, oh, all right, you might as well have the job. So here I am, 16 years later. So what do we do at Tate? Well, basically we are a support section. My talk, make it clear, if I'm talking about we at Tate, I'm talking about the bigger picture. We have departments, for example, in collection care. My lovely time-based media colleagues who are basically AV people, but they have a very tight focus on the art in our collection and known as formal loan-ins to Tate. So anything that's audiovisual media based or increasingly things like programmed systems. They might not have a screen or even audio, but if they're time-based, then my time-based media friends will be working on that. We work in very close collaboration, i.e., have you got a spare 20k projector we can borrow for this event or install. Yep, sure, no problem. We're not using this one. Off we go. Similarly, Tate Digital, a parallel department, and they'll be looking after our production work, particularly our what I suppose sounds a bit old-fashioned now, but what I used to call broadcast quality production, which is exactly what they're putting in social media and YouTube. So it's all maybe part of the thrust of the talk as well. Maybe it's all broadcast media nowadays. And various other departments who have interest in technology. Not to mention our partners. It's lovely to see you, Jason. I can't see you. Oh, there you are. So White Light would be a good example, and many others who's similarly helping us to do what we do. So we is quite a broad we, including Jason and Co. and many others. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution over 50 years, my career, but focusing specifically on what I've seen at Tate. So obviously the main changes that have happened over that period of time are the transition from analog technology to digital technology, and that's sort of a no-brainer, isn't it? And I presume I don't need to bang on about that too much, other than to say, well, yes, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we still at Tate have a great interest in film, slide technology. We had an artist in not so long ago with their collection of actually pretty low band SD analog video equipment, which somehow we had to integrate with our systems. So we need to keep our eye on what we call legacy technologies. An artwork produced in SD and intended for, say, a CRT monitor just doesn't look the same on a device like this. It isn't the artwork. The artwork includes the medium for presenting it to the audience. So again, that would probably be more in my colleagues in time-based media, but crops up for my team occasionally as well. Some of you may be aware of a company called The Box, and there are others who have warehouses full of legacy equipment we can draw on. And I'm aware my colleagues spend a fair amount of time on eBay looking for useful bits and pieces. One little insight into artworks: if we acquire an artwork, particularly if it's a legacy technology, then we acquire the means to present it as well. So the projector, say, the speakers and amplifiers and all the rest of it will become part of that collection item. Media is quite interesting when we're talking about items. It's quite or objects. It's quite easy to understand a painting as an object. Less easy to understand a video as an object. Yes, the tape itself might be an object, but is the digitized version of that an object? And increasingly, technologies that we're encountering now, the object, if you like, a video will be consistent. If you're playing it from the beginning of the tape to the end of the tape, it'll always look like that. But some artworks we've been working with recently are dynamic. They're informed by the environmental information that's being fed to them, for example, so they never repeat how they look on the screen. So how we would work with presenting something like that, quite different to a linear item that we understand how it looks because it's how it looked in the studio when we prepped it, and it needs to look the same for the 6 months it's on show. So analog to digital, yes, the means of presenting artworks in Tate have transformed, certainly in my time there, considerably. But one part of the argument I'd make around that is that, although interesting as I stand here with headphones on, the transmission of sound through the air and how it works in a resonant space versus a dry space, how it transmits through the building, how you feel it physically through the floor perhaps. Those experiences, I'm going to imagine, are very similar to the experience you might have had in ancient Greece as you watched a play unfold with the technology of the time, i.e. very little technology other than perhaps amazing architecture and understanding acoustics in space. Similarly with the image, or let's say light in the broadest sense, whether we're looking at lighting or images, which are also light in themselves, the way that we as human beings perceive light and perceive the image hasn't changed from the cave paintings, perhaps. I always think it's interesting when you talk about how a very deep cave, how the painters of those images would have perceived them, because they would probably have been using some kind of flickery light source, and the images take on a life of their own on the walls in that environment. I always think that sort of thing is very interesting, because artists are looking to do, or at least they're looking to inspire a very similar reaction in their viewer, the viewer of their artwork, now in 2024, as perhaps those cave painters were a long time ago. Okay, let's keep half an eye on time. I started a little bit late, but I don't want to run too far over. I want to talk a little bit about how some of those changes have manifest for us, particularly at Tate and over my career as well. So I talk a little bit, I think, about what I understand as 3 levels of, well, I'm a service manager, so sorry for the dry terminology, but 3 levels of service delivery, if you like. So you could think of it in technical terms, technology terms, professional equipment, 99% of what we see out here at PLASA. Prosumer equipment, 1%. Well, maybe it's more now. Maybe that's part of my argument as well. Somewhere in the middle, isn't it, between the professional equipment, prosumer equipment, and then what we might understand to be consumer equipment. The exemplar, except it's only a 13 iPhone, so the better exemplar will be the later models and some of the amazing camera technology I'm seeing on smartphones these days. It's a consumer technology, but its capabilities, its capacity, its ability to video something now and have it perceived by an audience around the world within seconds, that's amazing. Is that professional? Is it prosumer? Is it consumer? Is there a difference anymore? Another way of looking at it, certainly when I came in, was to understand the difference between broadcast, as in, say, for example, broadcast video, industrial, low band pneumatic, etc., and consumer, Super 8. Well, you know my age now, I've already told you, but again, those differences are blurring for me, and certainly in our services at Tate, and when we are supporting particularly artists, I'm focusing on how artists, we're working with artists these days, those distinctions are meaningless, particularly to young people, which is almost everybody younger than me these days, I suppose, but distinctions that were really important when I came into the industry aren't anymore, although we will understand that the means of achieving various results would still require, for example, a fully professional system. I had to have a chat with one of my very young sound engineers recently, who was unaware of differences in ratings. Now I'm going to get this one wrong. Is it +10 -4 or -10 +4? I forget, because it's been a while since I've had to deal with that. But how you set up a system has a huge impact in the workflow of making that system work to the greatest effect. But for many artists, that doesn't matter. They're not interested. What they want is to produce a really good quality sound. And what defines a good quality sound for them? Well, there might be a number of factors to that. A good quality lo-fi sound doesn't have to be supremely clean and evenly balanced across the EQ. The perception of it being a bit lo-fi, actually, for example, a million years ago, I used to produce demos, and sort of rough tapes, if you like, for sale at small-scale gigs. And that sort of level of media is still there, in the sense that if it's, again, another term I would use would be scratch. If it's a scratch video, a scratch audio production, then it has qualities of its own, and part of our job is not to over-engineer the service we're providing, because we don't want, there's a phrase which I don't think I'm going to use because the camera's live, but it's polisher. Actually, the last word in that sentence is kind of what we're after, the rough edge. So sometimes toning down what we're doing and perhaps cheating in some ways to achieve a lo-fi result is what's required. Or sometimes the artist, they're not really aware of some of those differences, some of that scale from what I was describing as consumer to professional. And your job isn't to teach them how to be a better artist. It's much more how to translate what they're trying to express in the way that they're trying to express it into the context of an art gallery, whether it's for a display over a period of time, or what you're seeing on some of the slides here, what we might call an intervention. So we're just going to commandeer a space in the Tate and set up and make something happen. Intervention or activation, another term. The intervention is when we're immediately adjacent to artwork. So the what's happening dynamically with the sound and vision is in dialogue with the artworks that you're in proximity to. An activation, well, this slide would be more of an activation. We're gonna liven up the bar for a night and run a DJ and get everybody having a good time, hopefully. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So, main point to make about the technology arc. It's pretty obvious, really, but obviously in the past, to achieve broadcast quality or top professional quality, take broadcast professional quality budgets. And now where we're at is it is possible, but it's not necessarily advisable always, and we still need that top quality and top quality budgets for specific projects, but it is perfectly possible to produce top quality results on, let's say, prosumer budgets, maybe even consumer, depending on the quality. I mentioned the iPhone earlier, depending on the quality of the consumer product. So that cost difference, there's very much a narrowing of the gap there. And obviously for an organisation like the Tate, well, we're very, very fortunate. We're a huge arts organisation. So for in comparison to many of our, let's say provincial galleries or smaller outfits, we have enormous resources that they can be very jealous of. But frankly, we don't have the same level of resources as, say, a corporate event client might be expecting. Hence, we would bring in our external production partners and make that happen. Although we do, quick story on what's called Star Cinema at Tate Modern. Up to about 2016, it was getting very tired, and it was running, I think, maximum 720p was the maximum HD we could kick out of it at that time, and stereo sound. So it was a bit, it was a bit ropey, to be honest. We ran a consultancy project, and consultant came back with, he's a great guy, incidentally. He's one of us in the AV industry, with very broad experience across public sector and private sector as well. Anyway, he did a lot of research and wrote up a great report, and he came up with your standard gold, silver, bronze options against cost, against outcomes. And I remember the head of estates coming back to me after that saying, "Oh, thanks, Dan, this is great, this is really useful. We need to soup up the Star. We want the platinum option," which that doesn't happen very often, does it? The only time it's happened in my career. But I like to think that I'm working alongside some pretty smart cookies within Tate, and they had that one absolutely spot on. The key drivers for that, there were two key drivers. One is to present artworks at optimum quality, basically the way we describe it is if we're hanging an artwork in the gallery, that's a priceless painting, and there's a vocabulary, isn't there, for how you perceive art in a gallery or museum, and that with the Tate, that needs to be at the top level. There's absolutely no difference if we're screening an artist's film. Quick aside on that one, Steve McQueen, 12 Years a Slave, you may be aware Steve McQueen's a Turner Prize winner, and we've had a long association with Mr. McQueen over the years. He screened 12 Years a Slave in the Star on that system and shipped what I believe was the only 35mm print of that over from New York, it was, for us to screen that because he wanted it screened on a film projector. I mentioned legacy technology earlier, and we maintain 16 and 35mm capabilities in both Tate Modern and Tate Britain. So we screened that. So we got a complaint. Oh dear. It so happened a colleague of mine is another AV professional, happened to be at the screening, big fan of Steve McQueen, and so he was there. So I called him up afterwards, and we got our John Chapman, our film projection maintenance guy in, and he did full calibration and testing. So my colleague said, no, it was great, it looked good to me. And John said, no, everything's spot on, there is no problem. It wasn't fuzzy and out of focus, like the complaint said. But consider this, and this was my conclusion, film is a softer projection medium, particularly than 1080p HD video. Actually, we have 4K DCP as well, so that's even crisper, isn't it? It's a very, very sharp, crisp image on a 4K DCP or a 1080p projector, whereas film has a certain softness inherent in the quality of the medium itself, which is why Steve McQueen wanted at Tate Modern to screen it in that form. And interesting that our lovely visitor, because of course we fully respectfully replied that we're doing everything we can to make sure it's better in future, and we thank you very much for your kind observations, which will help us with that. But between us, we're sort of like, well, clearly that person is not aware of the quality differences between various different media. Okay. So I'm wandering off topic a little bit, but if you guys are okay for time, I'll know I've been going on for too long when you all start drifting off, and obviously the call of the pub is overwhelming the call of what this geezer at Tate gets up to. Okay, let's move on a little bit though, because I talked about technology arc there. I want to talk a little bit about the workflow arc, as I call it. So when I came into this game a million years ago, or 1981 in that college, I used to get a little pile of bits of paper from the various professors. It was collated by the office, on a Friday afternoon for what was coming up, and there'd be like a twin slide and lapel mic in the auditorium at 10 a.m. on Monday, and so on. And so there's me running around for the rest of the week. And of course I had a telephone, so things would change, but as I'm sure some of you will know, if you have your slideshow in slides, there's no changing those slides. You can change the order. In the context of art, you could turn it the right way up when you've been projecting it upside down all these years and didn't realise. But beyond that, there's no changing what you're actually presenting. I didn't land it on my lovely Aztec colleagues today, but if I was like some of our visitors, I would come in and say, oh, here's my present. Oh, sorry, I keep doing that. I would sit down with them, load it up on their computer and say, oh, by the way, I've got 14 more slides I want to add, and I need to change the text on... heavens above. So anyway, that workflow, I haven't brought it today because, why would I? But in my toolkit, I still have my spare glass mounts, just in case, because you never know, do you, what might crop up. So that capability to move very, very rapidly in the planning and design and production of whatever, if it's a boring old talk like mine or a much more interesting performance from an artist, that capability now is accelerated just beyond my imagination, what I ever thought it could be. I think, like probably a lot of my colleagues here, when we understood what digital technology could do potentially, but we were still only early Windows or whatever it happened to be, so I wasn't able to do it yet, then we could say, oh, imagine what we would be able to do in the future. Isn't that amazing? But I think it's far exceeded what I imagined it could do, and it is doing so again. I'm not going to get into AI other than to mention that I'm not sure I can quite visualize what it is that it can bring to our industry, but I know that it's going to, absolutely, and I know that we as an AV section at Tate, for example, are going to have to be on top of it and aware of it. Actually, I do know already, I've got a good example of this, working on sustainability initiatives for our section in Tate, and obviously I'm looking for CO2 reductions, but my understanding of sustainability is much wider than just CO2 reduction. It might be energy consumption reduction, but it might also be the ability for us to sustain a program across a year by not wasting money on building sets and throwing them in skips afterwards, and so on and so forth. So it's a very broad subject. So I just landed on one of my team a challenge to give me some data on how, for example, it doesn't matter if they're Panasonic, but they are. It could be any maker projector, but how some specific projectors in our fleet, what they are drawing in terms of power, what their CO2, how we can translate that into CO2 consumption, actually full life cycle, what are the precious elements, metals, etc. In other words, how big are the holes we're digging in the Congo to make this thing happen. And I, as I do sometimes, sort of thought, well, I'm not going to expect anything back soon on that. He's a busy guy, and it's a peripheral project. A couple of days later, he came back with an A4 piece of paper with some really interesting and very insightful information. And he said, yeah, it's amazing what ChatGPT can do if you feed it the right questions. So, here we are, food for thought. Okay, let's move on. Procedures, well, this sort of came up the other day. Excuse me, actually. Better. This came up the other day where we had a very high level event on Saturday, just gone, and we got in a very, very professional stage manager, Maddie, we've known for a million years. We bring Maddie in for the big stuff, if you like. But it's big stuff that we're running, so it's not like full production coming in, but me and my team are running it technically, and my colleagues, the curators and the organisers, but Maddie brings a very high level of professionalism to stage management. And just interesting, I think, to note, a role like that would be very formalised in only formal situations in the past. So something like, specifically for us at Tate, if we were doing, well, particularly very high-level corporate events would be would fit that criteria, but there've been some very, very high-level performance art events where, frankly, we're getting all the top-level production in, and we need people like Maddie to call the show, etc., etc. So, yes, but this event, not quite at that level technically, but Maddie, she hadn't been with us for a few years actually, so she 3 or 4 years, well, probably it's pre-pandemic, isn't it? So I don't think we've seen Maddie since the pandemic. So she had to re-familiarise herself with the systems and the technology. But more to the point there was the understanding in the technical team that there is a particular language in show calling to make the cues work in the appropriate way, that somebody like Maddie would move into automatically, somebody like myself, etc., would understand that vocabulary again. But I think she was very good, because when she was confronted by a lot of blank stares and, ooh, oh, does that mean we have to go and dig the tech pros out of the store and make this happen, or can we just sort of wave our hands through the window like, yes, go? So Maddie adapted, and I think the point I'm trying to make by that is there is a formal high-level way of producing professional broadcast production or events, and there is also a sort of bit more rough and ready, it's back to that term scratch I used earlier. There's sort of a scratch way of doing things, and if you are involved with community arts, then you're basically doing scratch. And if you are the person we were working with on Saturdays, a signed artist or to a major label in the music business, then you're perhaps expecting the teams around you to perform in a certain way. So I think what I'm getting at is that the arc that I've seen is a very clear definition, delineation between those types of event or types of activity as of 16 years ago. It was quite clear this is a school's workshop, you don't need a show caller, you don't need tech pros, you just got to kind of wave at each other and it'll happen at the right time. And full professional level, the highest level that we can do, some of those boundaries are blurring. And part of our challenge, I think, and part of the excitement of what we do is to get the language right and to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to achieve it, and not, so for example, get a bit shirty because there isn't a full comm system, or it should be done like this. I think that's the main point I'm trying to make, that it should be done like has changed radically. And part of our, personally I'd argue it's part of the skill of any good AV technician, to understand and empathise with your stakeholders, whether it's the performer, whether it's your event organisers, and all the rest of the various types of, say, department, if you like, departments that are involved. So that you can be adaptable, you can talk at high level to your high level production partners, your the artists and their management or whoever are expecting a certain degree of performance from you, but equally you're not going to patronise and annoy the school's teacher, workshop leader who is just trying to make something happen for the kids. And you can adapt to that very rapidly, because 1 minute you're downstairs doing the workshop, 20 minutes later you're in the in our context you're in the tank, say, trying to deliver a very high level event. Okay, so I notice I've gone round the cycle. That was my sort of way of telling me that I've talked for half an hour now. There is loads more. Let's see what's really important out of this, though. Let's just touch on some of the challenges really quickly. So audio in particular in a gallery. So partly this came about through a journalist you may have come across, Phil Ward, and we spoke about various projects at Tate recently, and specifically his interest was in audio. And so some of the challenges we're facing there, well, there's some of the obvious ones, but challenges our colleagues are facing here, for which something like this is a good solution. But equally the resonance of a space. So the South Tank, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Tate Modern at all, but the South Tank is designated as our primary event space, and it has a very, very expensive treatment to the ceiling, which reduces the reflections in the room to, so you can tell me from your point of view as well. But personally, I think it's very good. It's not dead. You don't want a dead space for live performance, but it's not ridiculous like the Turbine Hall or the room next door to it, the East Tank. East Tank, something like 12-second decay in there. So great for, I think, great for choral work. If you want to put a sort of 4-piece upwards choir, it'll sound amazing. And if you, gotcha. No problem. If you design what you're going to put into the East Tank, then it will sound great. But if you try and put a band in with bass and drums, forget it. But really what I suppose I want to say about that is I've been fortunate. It was a couple of weeks after I started in 2007 that I got involved with the early design meetings for the tanks and the whole Blavatnik extension. I'm only a small voice, I was a little voice in the whole thing, but the voice was there. That meant that we could address those sort of concerns. Given I'm getting the from the back, I'll just mention the risk to art from audio. So of course a stretched canvas is like a drum, isn't it? So basically a painting is stretched canvas, and they will move, they will resonate. If you're activating a space with paintings in and you play your drum and bass at the level that you want to for a good party, it's going to cause serious damage. So we've spent a lot of time on researching this in very practical terms. We have some top level scientists, in my view, in the conservation departments at Tate, and there are various mitigation factors. Obviously control of the sound, what we program, what levels we run it at, etc., but also control of the artwork. So they will dampen paintings, they'll put dampers in the frames behind the canvas, so it has minimum movement. But in any case, it's something we really need to pay attention to. So look, okay, there's loads more. I can bang on for hours about this stuff, but given I've been given the nod, I'll stop there, but that might give us a minute or two for questions, if you have any. Or maybe I've said it all. Or maybe you thought you were coming to a different seminar altogether. Who knows? Anybody like to ask a question? I can always rely on our Chris.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, mate.
It's, a kind of flippant question, but is AI ever going to replace you?
Well, maybe me. I'm just a manager. All I do is spreadsheets and presentations. So you could have this on AI on the screen, couldn't you? And
or is any cloning technology going to be able to reproduce what you give?
But also it's a flippant answer, because the you is the much bigger picture, isn't it? Chris, I think we come from a very similar place. It's people, not boxes, and AI is a box. And it's people that make this thing happen, whether it's performance art or whatever, or maybe it's there's everything here, isn't there, at PLASA, high-level West End theatre or television or film production or whatever it happens to be, mega corporate events. Yes, the tech will improve, get quicker and easier, work better, be more reliable, do things that we probably can't, I hope, even imagine yet. But Steve, is it? My man Steve in the back, I couldn't, I'm very reassured when I come up and have a chat with a chap like Steve, who makes something like this happen.
It's a very good talk, very good presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. That's very kind. Anybody else? Hub time. Oh, one more. I have to wait a few more minutes. No, I'm joking. Oh, and another one here. Hello there.
Hello there. So one of the questions, you were talking about legacy equipment and how you keep an archive of pneumatic and VHS machines and such like. Do you think you're going to run out of skilled people to keep those machines going in the longer term, to keep that thing running itself?
Such a good question. I mean, my big concern is film. To run film through a projector is a very scary thing to do, especially if it's actually an artwork. Because that is, I was talking about object earlier, wasn't I? That is an absolute object. Okay, it could be a print. It must be a print. It has to be a print. We wouldn't run the master through a projector. But nevertheless, that's really scary. But even, yes, absolutely. Cassette technologies I don't think are that tricky. Hopefully that could be learnt quite quickly. But we have, for example, a digitisation suite where we digitise quarter-inch tapes. That the archive at Tate holds an enormous amount of quarter-inch and cassette and other media. So even just how you thread a quarter inch through a machine, but other factors like if tapes have been in store for a while and the risks that you run when you first run a tape off a spool that's been in the cupboard for 20 years without being played. We have the oven, I certainly have the knowledge, and yeah, good question. I think the answer is yes, eventually it will. I had an association for quite a few years with a body of people, what are they called? The Magic Lantern Society. So their particular interest is pre-cinema projection, so they're dealing with big glass slides. And the degree to which they have gone to understand the technology in the medium, the sort of Victorian and earlier technology that it takes to present that media is phenomenal, but there's very few of them. There's 20 or 30 of them in the country. There's a bunch in America, a bunch across Europe, so there's maybe 50 to 100 people who actually understand how that technology works. Yeah, it will go eventually. There are other technologies, aren't there? I mean, I would have no idea how to run a wax cylinder. Even if I had the player, I would be extremely nervous about firing that up. So yeah, I guess they will go eventually. Part of my mission is around digitization, because let's be fair, with artworks it's critically important, but a lot of what we're doing is around the art. It's to do with the interpretation of the art. So a lot of those tapes are talks, interviews with the artist and things like that. So I'm pushing really hard. I've got a little bit of cash, very tiny, to upgrade the system. I see you, and get it digitized, because in that context, it's the content that's important, not the medium. I'm getting the absolute from behind, but did you have a follow-up from that? I will wind it up. The question was about codecs. The answer is we have in our research department, they're working on that, how to make that last multiple lifetimes. I don't have the answer. Now, my good friend has been very patient, because me personally, I would have pulled the plug and the lights and the PA would have gone off ages ago. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. You've listened great, and really appreciate it. Thank you.